welcome back to Dutcher Delectables. So you've seen Dad's meatballs, but these are going to be Mom's meatballs. And I'm just going to say they are a step above Dad's meatballs. Now I'm not trashing them because they are delicious, but I'm just going to take it one step further. We're going to make some Mom's meatballs. So here's what goes into our meatballs. So in this bowl we have 3 pounds of meat. There is 1 pound of breakfast sausage and there is 2 pounds of ground elk. Now you can use any kind of lean meat that you want. I like to use wild game because that's just what we have on hand and I think it's amazing. But you're gonna just put it in the bowl and we're gonna set it aside for a second. I diced up some French bread earlier and just kind of tore it apart. I took the crust off of it. And you're gonna use about 3/4 of a loaf for this recipe, maybe even a full loaf. It just depends on how much you wanna mix into it. So we're gonna take this, we're gonna add in 1/2 cup of cream. I use heavy whipping cream. You can use fresh cream if you have it. If you do, I'm totally jealous. So you want 1/2 cup of cream. And then you're gonna do 1/2 cup of milk. And use whole milk because you kind of want that extra fat in it. And then you're just gonna stir it up. And you just want the bread to pick up that milk and cream and just become really soft. And then you're just gonna let it set for a little while. If you don't feel like there's enough liquid in your bread, then go ahead and add just a little bit more milk, which I'm gonna do. I would put in probably another 1/4 cup. You don't want it to just be a pile of mush, but you do want it to be soft and kind of squishy because basically this is taking the place of breadcrumbs in your meatballs, but it's totally worth it, I promise. So you're gonna let that sit there for a little while. We're gonna set that aside. We're gonna start with our meatballs. Okay, so we're gonna add in about 3 to 4 tablespoons of fresh parsley. You just want to dice it up to where it looks, you know, not as chunky as you think it would be. You can add more, you can add less. If you don't like parsley, you don't have to put it in. I recommend putting it in because parsley is delicious, but my husband would probably say otherwise. But like I said, these are Mom's meatballs, not Dad's meatballs. So 4 tablespoons is about 1/4 cup. So there's 1/4 cup, put that in there. Everything else we're gonna set aside and we're gonna put that in our sauce because we are making some great homemade pasta sauce also. You're gonna put in about 3 cloves of garlic. I used minced garlic just because it's a little bit easier. You can use fresh garlic. I highly recommend it. You're gonna do about 1/2 cup of Parmesan. Now remember, this recipe is for 3 pounds of meat, not just 2 or 1. Then you're gonna add in your eggs. And you are gonna get messy when you do this, but it's okay. Once we mix all of this, we're gonna let it set for a little while. That way the flavors can kind of get to know each other, you know. I won't say marry because everybody says, let your flavors marry. You're gonna add in your breadcrumbs or your bread mush. Whatever you want to call it. Always make sure you get a big enough bowl. I don't think I got a big enough bowl, but all right, as you can see, this is kind of a looser meatball. I don't know if you'd call it a dough, but conglomeration. You can see your garlic, your Parmesan, your parsley. This is just a great tender meatball, and it is a fried meatball. You can bake them. I have baked them. I prefer to do it the old-fashioned way, so I'm gonna fry them up in some oil. We'll get our pan going here in a few minutes, but like I said, we're gonna let this sit for about 30 minutes, just so everything can kind of come together and sit nicely together, and then we will form our meatballs. All right, guys, we put our meatball mix together. We're letting it rest. We are going to put together our sauce. This is a great hearty homemade sauce that just is so good. It goes great with these meatballs and you're gonna love it. So this is what goes into it. All right, so we have 2 large cans, about 28 ounces each, of whole tomatoes. I really like this brand. You can use whatever brand you want. You can use whatever, you could just use Prego if you wanted to, but for this one, we're going to be putting both cans in our pan. All right, we have the leftover parsley. I think there's about 2 tablespoons worth in here from our meatballs. We're gonna put that in also. We're gonna put in about 3 tablespoons of basil. I love this fresh squeezed basil stuff. I don't know why. I don't have fresh basil on hand. This is definitely my next choice. Then we're going to use 3 tablespoons of garlic and 3 large tablespoons, because this is Dutcher Delectables and that's how we roll. You're gonna have 2 cups of diced mushrooms, and this is a yellow and a little bit of a green onion left over. It was just in the fridge, that's what I'm putting into it. It adds great flavor to the mix. So we're just gonna add those in. We're gonna put this on the stove low and slow for about an hour, and we'll stir it every once in a while, and we just want it to come together. Once it's cooked for about an hour, I'm gonna hit it with the immersion blender and I'm just gonna blend it up. So we're just gonna let this simmer low and slow with the lid on for about an hour. All right, guys. So I'm gonna make homemade pasta. It is not that hard. I'm gonna keep it super simple, and that way you yourself can make this pasta also, okay? So all of our Dutcher Delectables recipes are user friendly. So this is a super simple recipe to make your own pasta, and it's totally worth it. All right, so we have just regular flour. You can use semolina, you can use type 00, whatever your preference is, but right now I am just using regular flour because that's what everybody has in their kitchen. There's about 1/4 cup of water here. Just start with 1/4 cup, you might not use it all. 3 eggs and some olive oil. We're gonna do about 2 to 3 tablespoons of olive oil. It really depends on the texture of your pasta as you're going. So we're gonna make our well. If you see green flecks in it, that's fine. It's just the parsley from when I made the meatballs. And trust me, it adds to the flavor. It's not a bad thing. So you make your well with 2 cups of flour. You want to fill the bottom of your well with olive oil, which equals out to about 3 tablespoons, 2 to 3 tablespoons of olive oil. You're gonna crack your eggs in the center of your well. You're gonna add in a little bit of your water. Do it about 2 tablespoons at a time. You don't want to do any more than that because you might overwhelm it. And you're just gonna sit here and you're gonna whisk it together. You don't want to breach the wall of your well. You just want to slowly incorporate your flour into it. This is time consuming, but I promise you it is totally worth it. If you don't want to make homemade pasta, then just use regular spaghetti or fettuccine, whatever noodles you have on hand. Hell, you could even use elbow macaroni. It does not matter. It is all personal preference. I just wanted to put this video in here, that way you guys knew how to make homemade pasta if you wanted to. If you don't ever want to, you don't ever have to. Nobody is saying that you have to for this recipe. So if you're about 2-3 minutes into it and you notice that your center is starting to get really custardy, that's not a bad thing. You just want to add a little bit more water. So I would go about a tablespoon more of water and just incorporate it in. Like I said, a tablespoon at a time. You can always add more flour if it gets to be a little too much, or if you accidentally pour in too much water, it's not the end of the world. Just add a little more flour to it. Pasta is very forgiving. And unlike bread dough, you can't really overwork your pasta dough, so that's always a great thing. You can add any flavors that you want into your pasta dough. I usually add garlic and herbs, but for this one, I'm just gonna do regular pasta. If you don't have a board scraper, a large knife works just as well. You just wanna roll it over on top of itself so it's not as sticky. And then you're gonna start working it with your hands. So you're just gonna bring it all together. You're gonna get a little sticky, but that's okay. It'll work its way off as you work your dough. Just gonna keep folding and pushing, kneading your dough. And if you do need a little more flour, that's totally fine. Just dip your hand in and put a little more flour on your board and just keep kneading. Like this is just a hair sticky. So I'm just gonna grab a little bit more, throw that down. One of the major problems that people have when they make pasta dough is they don't knead it enough. You really want to knead this for about 10 minutes, and then once you get it to a smooth consistency of Play-Doh is a good reference, you're gonna wrap it tightly in plastic wrap and you're gonna put it in the fridge, and you wanna let it rest for at least 30 minutes. And then you're gonna roll it out. You can roll it out with a pasta machine, you can roll it out with a rolling pin. It's whatever you have on hand. All right guys, it's been about 10 minutes. As you can see, our dough came together really nicely. There's no dry spots in it other than what I just set it on. The little green flecks you see is the parsley from our leftovers when we were cutting it up to make our meatballs. So I'm gonna wrap this in plastic wrap and I'm gonna put it in the fridge and we're gonna let it rest for about 30 minutes. Or a Ziploc bag, it doesn't matter. Plastic is plastic, you just don't want the air to get to it. Alright guys, the sauce has been simmering for about 30 minutes. Our meatballs have been resting for about 30 minutes, and we just got done with the pasta dough that is currently in the fridge, and we're gonna let that rest for 30 minutes. So here we are going to make our meatballs. So just a scoop or 2 spoons, I mean it doesn't matter. Use what is good for you. And take a spoonful. This is a bowl full of just all-purpose flour. I did not measure it out, I just scooped it out because you're just coating the meatballs in the flour. Just gonna kind of toss it around, and then you're just gonna form the meatballs. On the stove, I have a large skillet with about a 1/2 inch of oil in it, heating up on medium. You don't need a whole lot of oil, but you want enough that when you're putting your meatballs in there, it's gonna go up just a little bit. But as time goes on, the flour will cause your oil to bubble excessively, so be cautious of that. On a side note, if your sauce is just a tad too acidic, what I like to do is I'll put in a spoonful of brown sugar, and that usually cuts the acidity. So I might do that with this one. So if you see me before I use my immersion blender putting in some brown sugar, I'm gonna put in about 1 to 2 tablespoons of dark brown sugar. And it helps with the acidity, and no complaints from the family so far. So if you ever make a sauce and you don't quite like it as much as you usually would, just add a little bit of brown sugar, and that always helps. Alright guys, as you can see, our sauce has rendered quite a bit, and like I had mentioned earlier, I'm going to add just a touch of brown sugar just to cut the acidity a little bit. So we're going to add in about a tablespoon of brown sugar. If you ever make a pasta sauce and it's just a hair too bitter, just go ahead and throw in a little bit of dark brown sugar. I don't know why, but it just cuts the acidity a little bit, and it works really great. Then I'm going to use my immersion blender, and I'm going to mix this up just a little bit. So basically what I'm doing with the immersion blender is I'm just trying to break up the big chunks of tomato and mushroom, and I just want a smooth sauce. So that's the goal you're going for. You can use a potato masher also, that works just as well, but you do get a little bit chunkier sauce. Alright guys, so I took the dough out of the fridge. It was a little sticky, so I just floured my board, and then you want to cut it into individual little pieces, and then you're just going to roll those out, or if you're doing it by hand, leave it in one roll. Just flour the top of it and the bottom very, very well, and use your rolling pin. Make sure to flour your rolling pin. I'm going to use my pasta roller because I have one. If you don't, that's fine. You can see in my other videos, I don't use the the pasta roller. I do use a rolling pin. Remember, if you are making fresh pasta, it does not take as long as dry pasta to cook. So always, always prep accordingly. So I'm just going to lay this out here. I'm going to cut it in about half. And then if you have a pizza cutter, this is where a pizza cutter comes in really handy, because I'm just going to hand cut these noodles. If you don't have a pizza cutter, just use your knife. It's not that big of a deal. And these will not be symmetrical or pretty. They are just going to be functional. So once you cut them, sprinkle a little flour on them so they don't stick together. And then just kind of give them a little bit of a twist and set them over here, out of your way. And then do your next one. This pasta roller was $45 on Amazon, and I absolutely love it. I've actually used it so much in the first couple of weeks that I had it that it came up with a squeak. but you know, I'm not complaining. If at any point your noodles look like they're starting to stick, just kind of break apart your groups and sprinkle just a little bit more flour on them, and it doesn't hurt them at all. When you go to boil them, your water might be a little more starchy than normal, but that's okay. All right, this is our last piece of pasta that we're gonna cut. Our water is heating up. You want to use heavily salted water with a little bit of olive oil in it also. And you're gonna cook these for about 3 to 7 minutes, depending on how thick they are. Just constantly watch them. Like I said, they do not take anywhere near as much time as dried pasta. All right guys, as you can see, everything has turned out beautifully. Our noodles are cooked. Our meatballs are greatly cooked. Thank you, husband. And our sauce looks divine. So we're gonna plate some of this up and feed the family. Alright guys, if you like this recipe, go to DutcherDelectables.com, subscribe to our YouTube channel, like and follow us on Facebook, and try out Dad's meatballs and then try out Mom's meatballs. You will not be disappointed. Have a good evening.